Welcome to the 12th episode of Renegade Thinkers Live, a show that promises to be long on marketing insights and short on overhyped buzzwords. We'll be drinking in the latest tactics and the coolest gin. Yep, this may be the only live marketing show that also features a gin tasting. This show is being live streamed by our friends at Restream, and if you want to drink along at home, you're in luck. We've got a discount for you today of 20% off Raft Distillery with a code you're going to laugh at, Drew Rocks. We're tasting their Bummer and Lazarus gin. We'll get you that link in a minute. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, live from my home studio in New York City. So here's the deal. As a marketer, you can be the most courageous leader, the most artful visionary, the most thoughtful content creator, but all is for naught if you don't have the right metrics in place. How else can you justify not only your role, but also how much you spend and where you spend it? Needless to say, getting your marketing metrics right is not always easy in B2B, especially if you have 12 to 24 month sales cycles with a number of decision makers involved. Nonetheless, you must identify metrics that matter to your CEO and to the board, and then work backwards from there. No metrics, no seat at the table. And with that, I'm thrilled to bring in our first guest, the CMO of Cisco Meraki, Rebecca Stone. Rebecca was the star of episode 134 of Renegade Thinkers Unite when she was the CMO of LiveRamp, and is my go-to source for anything to do with building and optimizing a demand gen engine. Welcome, Rebecca. How are you?
Hi, Joe. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I've seen a different part of your home.
Yeah. Yes. It's not the laundry room, but actually I am still in the laundry room. It's just a fake background.
I see. All right. Well, anyway, so we've talked about, and I mentioned demand engines, and these are so important to measurement. I'm just curious, which sort of comes first, the metrics or the tech?
It's a great question. I think before even the metrics and the tech is the process and the data quality, because we have right now at Meraki both the technology and the metrics, and it doesn't matter because the data is so junky that nothing that we're saying is actually accurate. So I've learned a lesson from working here, is that data and the quality and the thought into that is just as important as those two things you just asked about.
It's so interesting, the clean data thing. I mean, it's the old rule in direct marketing, and this goes back 100 years, was that 60% was the quality of the list, 30% was, maybe the offer, and 10% was a creative, which of course always bothered me as a creative person. But so that data integrity was where we start, because if you have bad data, you have bad metrics. Well, yes. Obviously you have bad performance. So, all right, but we're going to now let's assume for a moment we do have goodish data. Yeah. What would be, let's start talking about priority metrics. And I feel like there might be some differences in the roles, like the CEO might have a set of metrics for you and the CFO might. But so let's talk about those in terms of how you go about determining your priority metrics.
Yep. I think, so the first one that I always start with is net new business pipeline generated from marketing campaigns. And I think that's whenever I join a company and there is not a strong set of metrics in place, that's the first one that I establish. The reason why is because that really ties you to the sales team. And it gives you a reason to be integrated and to be able to just align on what those priorities are from the very beginning. And it gives the sales a desire to kind of talk to you. The second one that I think is really important after you think about that net new pipeline and as you're growing is pipeline of influenced pipeline. And so as you have established that you can set a baseline, you know how much pipeline you're generating, the next thing on top of that is that influenced and upsell and retention kind of number, so that you can really talk to, hey, not just am I bringing in acquisition, not just am I acquiring new customers, but I am driving benefit to existing customers and how they're working with us.
So interesting. Okay, I want to go back to net new business for a second. And a lot of folks talk about, they use the term net new logos, right? Yep. And sometimes when you hear a term like net new business, we might be thinking of these are new customers coming into the company, right? That's not the same as adding revenue through an existing customer. Okay. Right. And when we're measuring that, that's just a closed deal. We're not looking at the value of that deal. We're just saying this, or are we looking this based on revenue, or are we based on the number of new clients?
Not number, it's pipeline. I think you have to tie to, if sales is going to be tied to a number, you got to tie yourself to a number too. It's not going to be the total number of opportunities. It has to be how much money are you actually bringing. I will say pipeline though, not just close one business, because I think it's there is a certain aspect of it that is fall on the sales team, which is from that he's open to the time that it's closed one. So I look at pipeline generated, not just net new business.
Okay, so pipeline generated that led to net new business.
Exactly.
Right. So one of the tricky parts there, though, is there's lag time, right? It doesn't become a net new business until they close it.
Yep.
So am I understanding this correctly? I just want to make sure that everyone else is listening, is that we know what this means, this measurement, because it sounds simple, but is that a leading indicator or a lagging indicator?
Well, it depends on what it's leading and lagging. I think pipeline, if you track pipeline is a leading indicator of the business that you're bringing in. And then closed one is where that lagging indicator is of how good that business actually is that you're driving.
Okay.
Now, when you talk, if you want to go a layer down below CFO, I'm happy to talk about that layer of leads that you're generating and the pipeline, the pipeline of leads that you're generating to get to the level of opportunity pipeline that you're also generating as well.
Okay. All right. We're going to bring on Chandar, and then we'll come back. So our next guest is Chandar Pattabhiram, who is the CMO of Coupa. Chandar was the star of both episode 199 and episode 14, going back in the archives when he was at Marketo. Now, among his many distinctions as a rock star marketer, I'm most grateful that Chandar is on the advisory board of CMO Huddles. More on that in a minute. Anyway, welcome, Chandar.
Great, Drew. It's great to be here. Thanks for the kind words. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Well, let's start at the 10,000 foot. Are there one or two metrics that matter most to you as a CMO?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think I want to piggyback on what Rebecca really said that really well. If I Google Earth it at the highest level, I would say there's three metrics, 3 or 4, and depends on what are you measuring at which stage. But for me, it's see more, win bigger, and activate more, which is more of the community piece. So see more is the sales accepted pipeline, and it's not just stage 1 pipeline. And the word leads and stuff like that are good within the engine room of marketing, but as we know, that sales doesn't really care about that. It's not just even stage 1 opportunities. It's accepted sales opportunities, and you have to have in a plan of record a goal for that every quarter. To Rebecca's point, it's a leading indicator. If that's hitting the right thing, then 6 months from now your business is doing well. Because you're leading and you've generated enough pipeline for deals for generating, scheduled to close 6 to 9 months from now, depending on your sales cycles. That's kind of the see more. The win more and the win bigger is trying to measure the effectiveness of your product marketing, assuming that the CMO also runs that. Is because no salesperson is going to come and say, I won because your presentation was great, or your messaging was great, or your pricing was great, right? So how do you measure the effectiveness of that? And effectiveness of a right go-to-market approach is A, is your ASP increasing, if that's important to you, and B, is your at-bats increasing relative to competition. So I think those are important points, and that's at the highest level. That's what I would start with from my perspective.
And so what I like about this progression is it is in fact a progression. We just want to get more quality leads in the system. Then we need to win a higher percentage of them, if I'm understanding this correct. Then we win bigger deals, which means we're moving up. And then finally, there's the last one, which I wrote down, but have now forgotten.
Is activate more, which is how do you get in creating this flywheel of advocacy driving acquisition? How do you activate more of your community, more of your advocates, to be part of this community and activate for your brand and shout from the rooftop and really drive that programmatically. That was the fourth one I talked about.
Okay. So, and now you and I have talked about this before, and I love to talk about it. How brand and demand are interlinked, and there's just very difficult to separate them. Yet we know that a CEO will typically approve a demand generation budget like that and a brand budget sort of kicking and screaming. Is there a problem, and is the problem that you can't draw this measurable connection between brand measures and revenue growth?
It's difficult if you're using traditional approaches to brand building, right? The way I think about it is a company is growing. I use the word, like, somebody used it, I liked it, brandquisition, which is, every acquisition moment is a brand moment, right? And how do you use brand as a way of effectively driving acquisition? So one tactic for that, the playbook we use at Marketo, the playbook I'm using at Coupa also is this educational marketing playbook, which is a really good playbook for a small company growing, for brand building, which is how do I use content and thought leadership to drive acquisition, but that's also a brand moment. For example, we partnered with Economist to create the strategic CFO in a rapidly changing world. But I can use that asset as a brand building asset for going after every CFO to advertise that, as much as it's a demand gen asset. So I think that's why the brand acquisition thing is really key in a company that's growing, in terms of how do you look at brand and do contextual brand building.
Okay, I get those, and you're very clever at putting that, because if I go to a CEO and say, I'm doing brand acquisition, they go, I like the acquisition part of that, so keep going. But you've also invested dollars in television, which I think was really interesting for Coupa. And some might argue that that's a little bit retro, and particularly as everyone went heavy into digital, particularly B2B in the last, COVID era. How do you measure the value of your TV ad buys in this context?
Well, you asked me the $64,000 question, right? I think we went to television. Again, it's a stage of company, right? We are in a different stage than we were 3-4 years ago. It is going from industry dominance to more mainstream prominence. And that's why we kind of shifted into going from this great company to a great brand, and how do you get more mainstream? And that's why we invested more in that. And from that perspective, I think it's, it's a little bit of correlation than causality here, which is, one, if you see the connection to your web traffic going up in the regions that you have advertised in. Two is you do a formal brand study every year to see the aided and unaided awareness have gone up too. And three is that every deal we run, we ask the economic buyer, hey, did you see us? Where did you see us? And we're connecting the dots on those pieces more, less at scale, but more to get that empirical point of view or an anecdotal point of view on that drill.
Yeah, I recall from my sort of analysis of what GE did, having been one of the largest owned stocks in the world, part of their advertising thing was also just to sort of help them with their stock. There is some investor relations value to being it.
Totally. And for example, we have done it on CNBC. So contextual brand building, we go after the CFO, and we didn't just do mass marketing in there, but we really contextually to go after the CFO in CNBC and do TV advertising in that. So that has definitely investor value too, to that perspective. Well,
and so as we're talking about this, when we're sort of, now we have these sort of surrogate brand measures of site traffic, and we have our brand health measures, which are real in some sense, although everyone knows that consumers of all kinds in any category are notoriously poor at remembering the exact moment they learned about a brand. All right, all really good stuff. It's time to bring in our third guest, Katie Risch, who is the CMO of Centro and the star of episode 206 of Renegade Thinkers Unite. Hello, Katie. How are you?
I am good. How are you, Drew?
I am great. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Now, you've heard Rebecca and Chandar speak about their priority metrics. How do these sort of compare to yours?
Yeah, I would say similar camp. I liked how Chandar kind of organized his by the see more, win more, activate more. And I think that he hit on kind of one of the big misperceptions, which is that you can't really attribute any kind of ROI or value to a lot of your brand efforts. I fundamentally disagree with that. I think if we look at a lot of our brand building efforts, there are things that we can measure that are kind of leading indicators, such as press mentions. We utilize our customer education arm called Centro Certified, which actually lives in the marketing department, as a really big branding tool for us. So we can measure how many people are actually signing up, getting certified, sharing their badges on LinkedIn. How many of those people are then converting into potential leads or customers? So I think, there's a lot we can measure from a brand building standpoint. I think the numbers that we're probably the most hyper focused on, though, are really that win more stage and looking at the revenue that has resulted in marketing generated leads, whether that's on the inbound or the outbound side. The way we actually structure things is we have our BDR team sitting within marketing. So we're able to really kind of look at inbound and outbound holistically because those two have kind of bled into each other. And we do approach it really kind of as one lead gen strategy overall versus kind of siloing that out. I think the one thing that we didn't really hit on so far was talking about the customer retention metrics.
Okay.
There are a couple of things that marketing is really focused on as it pertains to customer retention and customer growth. We like to look not only at new logos that are acquired through marketing efforts, but then what does that returning revenue look like? What does that LTV look like for customers that were generated by marketing 1 or 2 years ago? Are we seeing them grow? Are we seeing them churn at a higher or a lower rate than new customers that come in via other channels? Because that can really help us to gauge whether we're driving truly quality customers and the types of customers that we as a company want to bring on.
So, and I love that because we certainly know, and although no one has actually ever really truly proven this mathematically, that keeping customers is far more effective than it's just one of those things that's always existed out there as a truth, but hasn't really been proven. But let's go to customer retention. How do you actually look at that? I mean, it's a year, it's 2 years, it's a lagging indicator and an important one, but what are we looking at? Churn rate? Are we looking at growth rate? And how do you sort of put that in context?
Sure. So I'm looking at a couple things. One, I'm looking at churn rate, and I'm also looking at growth, but then I'm also looking at product adoption. So are these customers who are coming on board and growing their spend with us and starting to leverage all the different components of our platform? Because those are ultimately the types of customers we want. We want the customers who are going to be sticky, who are going to really kind of dig in and really start to leverage our platform for all aspects of their digital media versus just one component of their digital media. So those are the three things that I probably would care about the most.
Yeah, and I think I'll hold off on this question because I'm for the rest of the group, but I do want to just follow up on, are there metrics that you think are undervalued or overvalued by your peers in the C-suite? Yeah, just go on the carpet right now.
Yeah, I think, although I think that we're starting to get more aligned on the metrics that I would say have been overvalued in the past. I would say the most overvalued metric is probably just looking at the number of inbound leads. I think historically, a lot of marketing teams have been hyper focused on the volume, the quantity versus the quality. And I think, where I see this kind of prove out is I can look at 2020, and there are months where I saw a lot less inbound leads, but overall last year, we generated a lot more new revenue from marketing tactics than we had in years past off of less inbound leads. So I think that's one, luckily, that we're actually getting away from, is looking at that overall number of inbound leads. So I would say that one's been overvalued historically. I think the undervalued one is one that Rebecca hit on, which is that marketing influenced revenue. So a big part of my job and my team's job is really supporting our sales organization, working in tandem with them, and that's where that marketing influenced revenue becomes really important. Because if we're helping sales, move a prospect from a decision to the purchase stage through various marketing tactics, we really want to measure what is marketing's impact on that. And, we have resources allocated towards those efforts. So how can we measure that and then report back on that? So we can show a collective snapshot of marketing's influence overall in the company.
And I just want to make sure I love that. How would you give me an example where you would actually be able to show that? What does that look like?
I think one good example is, let's say we're partnering with sales and they have 30 customers that are in the contract stage and they're just really trying to get them over the hump. Marketing might, in tandem with them, host a virtual event where we bring them all together to do, like a gin tasting like you're going to do today or whatever it might be. And that, that's going to require marketing resources, marketing time. So we then track and measure, were those customers more likely to convert than customers who did not participate in the event? I think that would be one good example.
That's perfect. And it's perfect. Let's bring back the other guests, Melissa. Thank you. And while we're doing that, hey, Google, what are marketing metrics?
On the website clickfolio.com, they say, marketing metrics are measurable values used by marketing teams to demonstrate the effectiveness of campaigns across all marketing channels.
Effectiveness of campaigns across all marketing channels. Well, that sounds about right. I have a broad question for you, and then I want to come back to one thing, which is, I have heard this come out of some CMO's mouth, which is, don't do it if you can't measure it. I've heard that many times. And then I've also heard CEOs, specifically Jeff Jones of H&R Block, say that's pure baloney. Where are you on the side of not doing it if you can't measure it? Who wants to take that one first?
I can take it. I think I came up on the demand gen side, and I used to be if you can't measure it, don't do it, girl. And I have seen some very clear examples over the course of my tenure as CMO, and actually when I was probably my most recent mentor / boss, where he really demonstrated that things like changing category can have a huge impact on your business and on the reputation of your business that drives just so much really strong growth on both reputation, like industry-wide reputation, as well as sales, that you can't measure, because you can't measure a recategorization effort, really. So
it's really hard. And I guess you could look at whether an analyst embraced it or something, but I'm curious, Chandar, where are you on that side of, and again, your CEO is not watching, so you're safe, I'm sure.
No, even if he is watching, I would say this. I think there's two aspects to it, just piggybacking what Rebecca said. You can be a chief marketing officer and a chief market officer. If you're the chief marketing officer hat on, then I would say do not do it unless you can measure it, because ultimately all these things have to drive to, going back to the Google thing of effectiveness, right? And so I would say that if you're doing an activity, why do it unless it drives to revenue? Why do brand? Why do any marketing unless it's revenue marketing? So that's why we call the team itself revenue marketing, in terms of having the mindset that ultimately this has to be turned into something meaningful, right? That's on the chief marketing officer. But if I Google it and say that if I'm also the chief market officer, where I'm driving kind of strategic change and competitive advantage, and to the point of category creation, how do you cementing your category? How are you relatively positioning yourself? That becomes less of a measurement exercise, but more of a strategic positioning exercise. That I would say definitely you have to do. The value for that can be felt years from now, but that's also a mindset you need to have from a marketing perspective. Yeah. That's why you kind of put those two hats of chief market officer and chief marketing officer.
Well, I think that the challenge in this thing, and that I have constantly seen, is when you say don't do it unless you can measure it, what you're basically doing is saying all marketing has to be demand generation marketing. Almost all marketing has to be direct marketing. And you don't leave much room for how could you do a TV campaign like you're doing, even though it's targeting, because you might be able to measure it, but it's going to be hard to correlate, and it's going to take a long time. And if we're talking about measuring things on a quarterly basis, I just don't. And anyway, it is an interesting thing, but there's also this other part of this, which is we've got 10 to 12 decision makers in most of your purchase cycles. And so are you measuring every little interaction with every single one of those individuals, and how do those pieces sort of fit together? So I just find this notion that everything could be measured. Like, and we'll just ask this right now. How confident are you in your attribution model right now? Anybody want to grab that one?
Well, the problem. Okay, I'll let actually any of the other go. I'll also, Katie, if you want to go, or Rebecca.
No, go ahead.
No, I'll just say that the problem we have today is, to some extent, just because something can be measured, people think it's meaningful, as opposed to measuring what's only meaningful. There's a lot of this vanity metrics and engine room metrics we're throwing out there for attribution purposes. Going back to the Google ad that was there, I think it's about effectiveness, not efficiency. And I think that was the point made earlier too, is a lot of times we measure on efficiency of leads. Okay, I went to this event and drove 150% of the people required. I've generated, X number of more leads than required. Those are efficiency metrics. You might be doing a lot of efficiency, but doing it wrong. Efficiency is about doing something very well, but could be the wrong thing, which is effectiveness metrics. So that's why the attribution have to focus on effectiveness, not efficiency. And we can get rid of a lot of this efficiency metric, especially when it comes to, when it comes to alignment with sales, it doesn't matter. It matters in the engine room of marketing, doesn't matter in the alignment room with sales.
Right. And what's interesting is there are certain points where you can easily measure this, like what Katie was talking about, that sort of closing event, right, to help with it. So, all right, we're going to take a little bit of a detour for a second because I want to plug CMO Huddles. We launched CMO Huddles in 2020. CMO Huddles is an invitation-only subscription service that brings together an elite group of B2B CMOs to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. Now, one CMO described huddles as timely conversations with smart peers in a trusted environment. Another called them a cross between an executive workshop and a therapy session. As it happens, Rebecca, Chandar, and Katie are all huddlers. Tell me, what you guys have anything to add? No pressure.
Say, first of all, it's a fun group. It's a nice kind of break in your week from a lot of other meetings, and it's been a good opportunity to really network and hear from what others have succeeded at and others have learned from. So definitely appreciate the group and you pulling it together, Drew.
Thank you, Rebecca, Chandar. Not to put you on the spot, but feel free to chime in.
Well, I think none of us is as smart as all of us, so it's a great manifestation of that. And I think every huddle I go away with one idea that I didn't know before that can really be actionable for me. So that's been very, very valuable from that perspective.
I love it. One idea. All right, Rebecca, anything else? Or we just keep moving?
I will echo that. And I have found such value over the last year in participating, and really do believe I have taken away so much. And I think my team is almost tired of me coming back from every CMO huddle saying, hey, I heard this. What do we think about this? And they kind of just roll their eyes at this point. But we have implemented a number of things that have made a significant amount of difference. So I do think, I love that the hive mind that Chandar referred to is really been a phenomenal resource for me and for my team.
I love it. I love it. That's awesome. Thank you all. All right. So we've talked a little bit about this, but in effectiveness, Chandar, you use this term, and obviously we heard it on Google as well, but there's such a complex sales cycle, right? There's so many people involved. I know that you could do something at the end of the thing, and then we can have this marketing sort of influence thing. But where does it say, and how are you measuring? CFOs are a key target for you, Chandar, and I know, Rebecca, you have a range of targets. But what about these influencers, and what about all these other things? How are you really holding this together and saying, okay, we did this thing and it got us here? All the way through. I mean, again, I'm sort of pushing on attribution modeling and to say, are we at a state of the art where we know that this combination of things will get us to, based on these effective measures? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that is where the art of marketing comes in, Drew. And there are some things, again, to the point that I think that you're trying to make, that you can't measure. I think every deal is different because every deal are being sold to and have different cares about. There are the politics of the organization that you're selling into that have an impact. Whether or not the person that downloaded your thing or is talking at your event is looking for a new job or not. Like, that has sometimes a little bit of an impact. And so I think that there is a little bit of art to marketing. There's not going to be one thing that is going to be the same and you just press a button and it will be the same for every single company that you sell into. But that's the fun of it, is the challenge of continuing to try and drive, to Chandar's point, the most effective of those strategies, and then being able to plug in the little nuances and differences that make an impact to that particular company at any point.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to what Rebecca said. It's, so much of what we do is relationship-based selling, that there is no perfect attribution model that's going to give me the exact formula of what's going to work every time. Because again, every customer is different. Every vertical is different in how we approach it. The sales cycles look different. The ways they would engage with us might look different. So, I would say the state of attribution modeling at this point is just a state of growing complexity. And if I look at, for most marketers, probably implementing that last touch model is probably the easiest one to implement. But to Chandar's point, that's not necessarily going to measure effectiveness. That's not going to take into account all the other things that we're doing to help that prospect along in the buying cycle, like, utilizing our blog, our social media, thought leadership, virtual events, even our display advertising. So I think personally for B2B marketing, particularly when you have a longer sales cycle like we do, and there's many opportunities for that prospect to engage with us along the way, you've got to really kind of figure out what is the right attribution model that's going to work for us, that might, weight the first touch and the last touch as your two most important things, because the first time someone engages with your brand and then the last time they engage with your brand before they convert, to me at least, are two of the most important touch points. And then really figure out how to weight those other activities that happen in the middle. But even that is going to be directional, and there's an art and a science to it.
Yeah. The interesting aspect that's changed in the last few years is when you're running a double funnel approach today. And what I mean by that is most companies in B2B have this double funnel where they have a lead-based marketing approach, and then you have an account-based marketing approach. And you're typically running a double funnel. In larger enterprise segments, you'll probably run more account-based marketing. In smaller mid-market corporate sales segments, you'll have a much more of an inbound lead-based engine working. The challenge becomes if you just start looking at the traditional metrics of what did I source, etc., that will not work in an account-based model. Because what does that sourcing mean if you and sales know that they're going after the same accounts? So having that mind shift to go from this traditional aspect of who opened the door, what was the sourcing, into more, what is collectively, jointly, what are we influencing and winning? I think that shift in attribution is where the big change happens in the minds of the marketers and in the minds of the CFOs too. Like, how am I allocating marketing budget from a world where it was all sourcing to a world that you're completely influencing an account-based world, right? So that's the big shift that is happening that a lot of these marketers are going through.
Sorry, Drew.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that I love that thinking, because it's not like, oh, this email had more weight than that email in an attribution model. What I really think of it as is, what is over the lifetime, the number of touch points, whether they be email or event or whatever, and how much is that impacting sales? So you see, you have to look at those things together, and you almost look at them as a continuum on the spectrum of touch points that lead you to that ultimate close. So.
Okay, it's time to, I think we have our guest lined up as well, right, Melissa? So we're going to take a break for a second, play a video. We got to go to our refrigerators and get our gin, and we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Peter, come take a look at this. Mr. Daniels.
Look at this. What's this?
The numbers, they keep getting bigger and bigger.
The clicks are off the charts.
Yeah.
Yoshi, it's Walter. We're back.
Yes, sir!
I need more trees. More, please. I'll get you more trees.
Hey, take a look at wood pulp.
Whoa. Everything you got on wood pulp right now.
He really loves that thing.
Adobe did not pay me to run that ad. I just want you to know that you should, but it's so funny. And since we've been talking about measurement, you can measure the wrong thing. Anyway, today we are tasting Bummer and Lazarus gin from Raft Distillery. As a special treat, Raft's distiller, Carter Raff, is joining us today. And by the way, Raff has graciously created a discount code for 20% off of all of their spirits. His code is Drew Rocks. I had nothing to do with that code name, but I kind of like it. And you can order it at Raft Distillery. Anyway, welcome, Carter. Are you there?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, I hear you pretty well. Hey, by the way, I'm just holding up the bottle. It's a beautiful bottle, and they're the two dogs, Bummer and Lazarus. Hey, there you are. Welcome. What's the story behind this gin? The name.
So I'm 5th generation San Franciscan, and I went to Sonoma State University and started making wine back then on my own back in the early 90s, and that naturally progressed to distillation. So, I kind of just decided it was time to either put up or shut up. So I started a distillery in 2011, and here we are today. And like I said, being 5th generation San Franciscan, I want to honor my heritage. So my great grandfather had a store down on the Barbary Coast, and Bummer and Lazarus were actually 2 real stray dogs who lived in San Francisco in the late 1800s. They were so good at catching and killing rats that San Francisco actually passed a separate statute to protect them from the dog catchers. So normally back then they would kill stray dogs on sight because they could run in packs and do a lot of damage. So they were so beloved by the city that when they died, it's an estimated over 10,000 people showed up to the funeral.
And, I just noticed that, which is an amazing story, that one of them, I guess Lazarus, actually has a rat tail, tail on his, which is not necessarily the normal thing to find on a gin bottle. All right, well, let's actually taste this gin. Okay. I know Chandar and I haven't tasted it. What should we be tasting, Brad?
So when I started my distillery, I didn't want to do the same old stuff that everyone else was doing. So my gin's a lot more floral and citrus, and I make it with 100% California grapes to honor my wine baking background, and so it gives a creamier mouthfeel actually making gin with brandy.
Wow. That's so interesting. And and so the alcohol base is actually from distilled grapes, yes, as opposed to a wheat or something. And by the way, for those of you listening, gin, you can distill with any kind of alcohol you want, as long as juniper is the dominant botanical. Exactly. At least that's my understanding, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And gin's a usually 2-part distillation where you got to make the base alcohol first. So either you take grapes and ferment them into wine and then distill that into a neutral brandy. Then you put that back in the still with your botanicals and distill it over again to make gin. Or you can do that with any other base alcohol like corn or wheat or
Got
potato.
it.
Yeah.
So Chandar, Rebecca, what do you think?
I think it's awesome. It's really good.
Thanks.
Yeah, I am not a gin fan, and I actually appreciate this. So, and I understand why it's not that it's not that grainy taste that you normally get with it. So.
Yeah, I definitely get that citrus going on there.
And it's very apt, Drew. We're talking about the gin room of marketing, pun intended. So.
Yeah, that's honestly what my target audience was, to show people that gin can be approachable without having this explosion of juniper in the mouth. Because the gins out there that have all juniper, they're excellent, but it's like a triple IPA. After 2 sips, I'm done. Like 2 sips, and it's the best thing I've ever tasted. But I can't drink a whole cocktail with it. It's too overpowering.
So would you do it typically plain, or do you do it with tonic like the rest, all the other ones that we have?
I mean, it does make a great tonic, but it really lends itself to pretty much any cocktail. I mean, I'm not really shy, so I say it makes the best martini in the world. So, but you got to make a real martini. So it's 2 1/4 ounces Bummer and Lazarus gin, and then you got to use a good vermouth like Dolan's dry vermouth, so 3/4 ounce of that, and shake it with 1 piece of ice, because good alcohol doesn't need too much chill on it. You just want a little to help all the other alcohols meld together, and you want a little of the water in there to help open everything up. And, personally, I don't garnish with anything because you want the flavors of the cocktail to come out. Now, if you were to sip on that, it'll blow you away.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Now, one of the things that we always do is we find a story in the gin. In this one, we noticed that you use Hetchy water. So, hey, Nicole, what the heck is Hetchy water?
It's water that comes from the glacial Hetchy Valley in the northwestern corner of the Yosemite National Park. It's a primary water source for 2.5 million Bay Area residents, and it's one of the cleanest municipal waters in the United States.
There you go. Thanks, Nicole. All right. Well, thank you, Carter, for this amazing gin. And don't forget, everyone, use the code DrewRocks. You will probably try that on any website, but I would use it on Raft Distillery's website for 20% off. And now we're going to get back to marketing and measurement. So we'll see you later, Raft. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Yeah, bye, Carter. Okay. Cool. So I had a question as we were talking about this earlier, and I'm going to try to remember it, but this notion of learning, right? We're trying to learn as we go along. So if we have all these combination of metrics, isn't part of the program of having metrics so you can say, hey, we did this and this happened, let's try this. So let's talk a little bit about some changes in things that you've been able to see that your metrics have actually helped you change your programs and make it more effective. Because isn't that the goal here too?
Yeah.
Anybody want to jump in on that?
I'll say one thing that's helped us in the last one and a half year, 1 year in the pandemic, and then people can jump in here, is, historically, cross-sell marketing has been very important. I think the point that Katie made was a really good point, that adoption is so important, right? In the stairway to heaven of marketing, as they talk about, it's awareness, acquisition, adoption, and then expansion and advocacy. And people kind of forget the adoption in between, because if nobody adopts anything, you can't go expand. But what we hadn't had was really metrics for expansion and adoption. We really have tangible product lines and say, for this particular product line, we're trying to drive this particular number of opportunities or pipeline for that, for expansion into install base. But having those kind of metrics really gets a mindset for us to go and say, just like we're running the programmatic engine for acquisition, we're going to run a programmatic engine for these specific product lines for expansion at the right stage of the journey. So the metric, starting with the metric and working backwards, really helped us, Drew, on that.
Interesting. How about you, Katie or Rebecca? Did either of you have a metric or revisit a metric and said, this one isn't helping us, but this one is?
Yeah, I think in terms of helpful metrics. So, and first of all, I got to say I missed the gin tasting because I'm 6 months pregnant. Otherwise, I would have been there. I think one of the helpful metrics for us has been, we launched our platform basis 3 years ago. And when we first launched the platform, we cast a really wide net simply because we needed to understand the audience and the customer base that we were going to see start to use this platform before we could kind of hone in and do more customized, tailored, targeted marketing. So I think starting to look at metrics by vertical and then customizing and tailoring our marketing efforts around those verticals across the entire board. So everything from product marketing to content marketing to what are we focusing on for new content on our website or new pillar content, and then bleeding into our demand gen efforts. That's been incredibly helpful for us because it allows us to kind of narrow our focus. And if we have limited resources to work with, I want those resources to focus on the areas where we're most likely going to win. So I think that's been a tremendously helpful one for us.
Yeah, actually, this came up in a huddle yesterday, and because they're always confidential, I can't, but this individual was talking about really looking at all their metrics on a vertical and a micro vertical level, because some verticals just have slower close rates and some have different, revenue levels. And so I thought that was a real insight. I want to sort of step back for a moment and do an exercise, and we'll say we're going to imagine a perfect world where you have a CEO who says you get to report 8 metrics to the board. That's it. That's it. What would love to get to that number, and you only get 4 categories, and we'll decide what those are. But we've talked around a lot of these things, but in a broad base. But you get to come into the board with 8 metrics, and you have to decide, are these past looking, forward leaning? Let's help this audience create a perfect dashboard. I'm going to ask Rebecca, give me one somewhere, perhaps with acquisition.
So I think the first one is the one that I talked about from the beginning, which is net new pipeline generated from
net
perspective.
Okay, net new pipeline under acquisition.
So new logo, new business, just to be as clear as possible.
New logo. Everybody, you guys buying into that one as if we only get, let's say we're only going to get 2 acquisition metrics.
Yeah, I think I would put that as sales accepted pipeline as much as stage 1 pipeline, which is it's stage 2 pipeline. That's the way I would think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's almost 2 metrics, because I would break out pipeline from then revenue or new logos.
All right, we're simplifying here. Okay, but revenue versus new logos. Okay, we haven't quite done it. All right, so let's talk about retention. You guys have been talking about that. What do we put down? What are 2 metrics for retention?
So I would look at revenue from returning marketing generated customers. That would be 1. So not only measuring marketing's contribution from new logos acquired this year, but then if you pull in returning customers, what does that look like?
And that's going to be a lagging indicator, right? Because
Correct.
we have to wait for a year. Is there any sort of retention metric that isn't tremendously lagging that you can think of that would help here? Because
I guess it depends on retention. We have for renewals pipeline. So we would look at renewal pipeline if you're looking at a leading indicator as that measurement.
And renewals pipeline is sort of an estimate of what you expect, right? This is where you think these folks are going to renew.
Yeah,
so
it's when a salesperson is in active conversation, or I said sales, I should have said CS. When a CS person is in active conversation for renewal business after the first year, they have to open an opportunity for that renewal business.
So we've got a couple of. Go ahead.
I would say one thing. Let's, even before going into the post-sale, I think there are a few other important board metrics in the pre-sale, in the acquisition stage. We should probably go that, and then to the other. Maybe the 8 is only 5. We can say, hey, you can get back 3 metrics, right? You don't need 8. Going back to that, I think an interesting metric I learned, like, Vista, for example, when Marketo was acquired by Vista, it was an interesting thing they always asked for, and I understood why, is that the year-over-year growth in sales accepted pipeline, that trend, as much as have you hit your new business goal of saying I'm supposed to generate 100 new opportunities at this pipeline, have you hit that? That's one thing. The second one is that if your sales is in a high growth environment is expected to grow 30%, is your pipeline also relatively growing in the same amount of 30-40% to show that it's a leading indicator, right? So that was another metric that was important at the board level. I think the first time I started doing it at Vista, and I think it's been useful for us just to understand that. I would add that perspective.
Year over year. Okay. So we've talked a little, we've got acquisition metrics and retention metrics. We might have 5 already. What about brand? Is there brand health? I mean, are we going to be able to, let's assume for a moment that we all agree that brand matters in this formula, and there are ways of measuring brand. Are we going to put something there? And if so, what is that brand health metric?
True. This is something, so I already report on this to our board, and it's something that they're really interested in, which is just looking at overall press mentions.
So as a
number of times we've been mentioned, number of bylines published, like there's different, KPIs you can pull into that, but just looking at overall earned media, I think is an important one.
Interesting. So that's a sort of somewhat of a reach metric, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just pure reach in terms of that.
But not necessarily pure reach, but I think a lot of companies have this scorecard where you say, I'm going to have a target of 3 to 5 tier 1 earned media hits every quarter. And how am I performing relative to that? And how am I scorecarding relative to that? And it'd be interesting to showcase that at that level. It's just not brand, but it's a combination of different things. But that's one way of manifesting.
Yeah, it feels a little. I mean, if we could have a broader reach number, like an awareness study, if you're doing a brand health, then we'd have the broader, because we'd not only know not just that placement, but the result of that placement, right? That you'd have this unaided and awareness score. So it feels like that might be a place. So we've got reach. Is there anything else in terms of the brand health that we're looking at? Have you identified an attribute about your brand that when you improve that, things are good? Like, you know, and there are some companies that have been able to do that.
So the brand is a manifestation of your community too. So if you can look at it, just as it's a manifestation of the external, how much is your community activation? So if you're having metric around advocacy and how many net new, you know, whatever advocacy program you've created in these different tiers, are you generating would be another interesting thing from a board perspective. Are you activating your community as much as you're acquiring new prospects, right?
Yeah. Okay. So the last area that I want to ask about, go ahead.
I think the other one, I agree with the advocacy one. The last one would be for us, showing up in some of the Gartner wave reports is really important. And so we track on analyst mentions and wave reports, things like that.
Yeah. And I think you could create this sort of combo reach, right? Of PR mentions, analyst mentions, maybe weighted somehow, and advocacy. I like advocacy because it really is, you've acquired the right customers, you've engaged them in the right way. One thing that did not come up when we had this discussion at CMO, at the Super Huddle, is the CMO's role in employer brand. And that we talk about that at all. And I'm just curious if that should be on the CMO dashboard as far as you're concerned, in terms of likelihood to, you know, as someone from the outside looking in on the company, whether or not this is a company I want to work for.
I have an opinion around that. And I think it should be on the marketing dashboard, simply because, especially if you look at it from an earned media standpoint, from my standpoint, having all of that kind of under one roof and approached holistically makes the most sense. There's a lot that we do from a marketing perspective that is really designed to help support our employer brand and our recruiting efforts. A lot of that is tied to earned media. So when I'm reporting on the earned media metrics, I'm including the employer brand metrics within that. And I think, you know, we're lucky that we've got really tight alignment with our head of talent and development. So we're aligned on some of those things. I think the other ways we really support them are through blog posts, running different blog series that are more focused on culture versus on the business or the industry. And then also ensuring we're incorporating that into our social media. So from my standpoint, if you look at, you know, having one voice externally that represents the company, it makes sense to include that employer brand into your overall marketing strategy.
Go ahead, Chandar.
That's a good point. I mean, the initiative we have is called brand culture, right? How a great brand is built inside out, happy employees to successful customers, right? So I think having employee advocacy as part of the marketing team is a very critical hire. From a board perspective, at least one person's point of view is that it still isn't like the top 7 metrics that you would say that here is what we're doing on that piece. As much as
right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's too fuzzy. Yeah. I just got a note from Julie Kaplan, who's listening. She's saying she's separating brand health from performance metrics. Instead, she's trying to tying operational excellence. So question, how does transaction and product satisfaction impact your brand? Interesting. I don't know. I don't know if I read that correctly. Anybody have an answer for that?
I think it impacts our brand dramatically. I mean, one of the things that we look at is our CSAT score, our NPS. To me, our NPS is somewhat of it can be seen as a leading or a lagging indicator, kind of depending upon the way you look at it. But we also look at things like G2 Crowd. So, how are customers and, industry experts talking about our platform? How are they ranking us? So, from my standpoint, it's a big deal, and it can be a tool that you can really leverage to help build your brand, or it can work the other way to your detriment, depending upon what that feedback looks like, especially if it's in a public forum.
So, Julie, thank you for that question. Of course, this is just the time that it's time for me to ask, what would Ben Franklin say? I know it's a random part of the show, but it's in every show. So this is what I think he might say. He would say, the things that hurt instruct. And it's really true with metrics. If you get them wrong, you will never forget that lesson. All right. Well, we're getting near the end of this show. And it's interesting. We keep adding. This is the hard part with metrics. We keep adding to these metrics. And ultimately, your job as the leader in marketing is to pick the few and negotiate, right? Because it is a negotiation. Because as you said, Chandar, even though employee is really important, the board may not be with you. So this is an interesting moment. All right, let's look ahead on, as you look ahead, do you see privacy changes making it harder or easier to measure the things that you're doing? Also, is tools like AI going to make it harder or easier? So here's the question. 3 years, will there be anything you want to measure that you can't? Anyone want to make a bet?
Well, I think, the privacy changes. One of the interesting things is that, as we talked about brand acquisition, is, customer experience is a sum total of every touch that it's that continuous context, the connected context between, engagement 1, engagement 2, engagement 3, engagement 4, engagement 5, etc. Ultimately, from starting with the first step to ultimately lifetime value, it's a very difficult thing to measure today. We only measure parts of it. The challenge is going to be like with what Google is going to doing and Apple is how do we continue to do that, especially with cookies and stuff like that. It reinforces the importance of first party data coming and reinforces content marketing as a field. But that's going to be one big challenge as we go through all these privacies, and can we connect that context with the same person across these different touch points and these different channels? That's going to be the challenge.
It's going to be. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the technology keeps getting better and better, and we have more and more data. But there's this looming issue out there. Like if cookies go away, and imagine for a moment, EU isn't that far away from banning email, pretty much. So then what happens? We have no email and we have no cookies. All right. So, but Rebecca and Katie, not going to let you off the hook. Are we going to be closer in 3 years to measuring everything you want to, or kind of where we are today?
I think we'll probably be closer. And the reason why I say that is, I used to work in the ad tech industry before my current company, and I see the amount of money that flows into the industry. That money is not going to go away. It's going to have to find a place to go. And people are used to measuring. And so they're going to require some sort of measurement in the future. So I think it's going to continue, and we're going to have more visibility.
There you go. And Katie?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who works in ad tech now, I can tell you we're really close to this. And I think marketers who are prepared and who are starting to rely less on third-party cookies for targeting and starting to utilize things like semantic targeting and first-party data, I think they're going to be set up well to actually probably measure more. And then the question is just going to be, how do we actually drill down to what the most important data is? Because there's probably going to be, instead of 8 on that list, Drew, like I think 3 years from now, it's probably going to be like 30. So how do we narrow that down and not get stuck in kind of, analysis paralysis land?
Yeah, exactly. God forbid. We're there's no doubt we're going to have more data. We're just, in order to be smart, we're going to have to keep it simple. Anyway, keeping it simple, lots of discussion. I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you, Chandar, Rebecca, Katie. You're all wonderful sports and brilliant. Thank you, Raft Distillery, for your anything but bummer and Lazarus gin. Thank you, audience, for staying with us. Please join us in 2 weeks when we'll be talking about consolidating B2B brand names with Grant Johnson, Josh Leatherman, and Kevin Ruane. All right, cue the music. Renegade Thinkers Live is produced by Melissa Caffrey. Our Duke intern is Charlotte McAvoy. Our botanical expert is Nicole Hernandez. For show notes and past episodes, please visit renegade.com, home of quite possibly the savviest B2B marketing agency in New York City. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, and until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.